releasing every Real Madrid player to see where they would go. First up is Rodrigo, and he went to Juventus. Next up is Ferland Mendy, and he went to Young Boys. As long as he doesn't follow the footsteps of the other Mendy, then he'll be fine here. Next up is Marco Asensio, and he went to LA Galaxy. Weird anyways. Next up is Carvajal, and he went to PSG. Next up is Valverde, and he has joined Real Madrid's rivals Atletico Madrid. Next up is Militao, and he went to Chelsea. Next up is Eden Hazard, and he joined Dortmund. That's good to see him join his brother's club, but he's probably gonna get injured on the way there. Next up is Alaba, and he went to Spurs. That's it. He retired his trophy stat. Next up is Vinicius Jr., and he went to Roma. That Roma team is looking very good now. Next up is Rudiger, and he went to fucking Ajax. We were so close to having a full episode of this without Ajax. Anyways, next up is Modric, and he stayed loyal to Real Madrid. Respect. Next up is Kroos, and for fuck's sake, we already had Ajax, we don't need both. Next up is Courtois, and he betrayed Real Madrid and joined Barcelona. Last up is Benzema, and nobody wanted him. I wouldn't want him either after his recent performances. Anyways, what experiment should I do next? Releasing every Manchester United player to see where they would go. First up is Phil Jones, and he went to Shamrock Rovers. That's so random. Anyways, next up is Van der Beek, and he went to Newcastle's bench. Next up is Fred, and he snaked United for Manchester City. Next up is Luke Shaw, and he didn't go to any club. Next up is Martial, and he went to Monaco. Next up is Lisandro Martinez, and he went to Besiktas. Next up is Marcus Rashford, and he went to the German side Frankfurt. Next up is Harry Maguire, and nobody wanted him. I'm not surprised. Next up is Eriksen, and he joined Atletico Madrid. Next up is Anthony, and he went to PSG. Next up is Varane, and for fuck's sake, we really can't get away from Ajax. Next up is Sancho. Oh, for fuck's sake, not another one. Next up is Bruno Fernandes, and he went to join his national team. Next up is De Gea, and he went to Real Madrid. Next up is... Anyways, last one is Ronaldo, and he went to Arsenal. Poor Ronaldo. He just wanted to play Champions League football, and he can't do that in Arsenal. What experiment should I do next? Releasing every Barcelona players to see where they would go. First player is Ansu Fati, and he went to Brentford. Next player is Marcos Alonso, and he went to Bayern Munich. As long as he doesn't drive a car to there, then he'll be fine. Next up is Ferran Torres, and nobody wanted him. Next up is Araujo, and he didn't go to any club either. Next up is Dembele, and he went to Chelsea. Finally, Chelsea got a bit of revenge. Next up is Rafinha, and he went to Liverpool. Liverpool has more wingers than Spurs has trophies, if Spurs even has any trophies. Next up is Piqué, and he went to Inter Milan. Next up is Koundé, and he went to Juventus. Next up is Kessié, and he went to Atletico Madrid. Next up is Jordi Alba, and he went to the Turkish side Trabzonspor. Next up is Sergio Busquets, and he stayed at Barcelona. He was probably too slow to join any club. Next up is Pedri, and he went to Spurs. Poor Pedri. The only trophies he has a chance to win is international trophies. Next up is the Pie, and for fuck's sake, we were so fucking close to completing a full episode without Ajax. Next up is De Jong. Not another one. It's the Dutch players that's going back to the Netherlands. That's the problem. Next up is Ter Stegen, and he went to Bayern Munich. That's a pretty useless move since they already have Neuer. Last up is Lewandowski, and he stayed loyal to Barcelona. What experiment should I do next? Releasing every Liverpool player to see where they would go. First up is Joe Gomez, and he went to West Ham. Next up is Darwin Nunez, and he went to Dortmund. He is really trying to be Haaland. Next up is Roberto Firmino, and he went to Real Madrid. All their attack is gonna do is dance. Next up is Henderson, and he went to Chelsea. Next up is Matip, and he went to Bayern Munich. Next up is Luis Diaz, and he went to fucking Real Sociedad. I haven't seen them in so many episodes. Why are they back? Next up is Diogo Jota, and he went to PSG. Next up is Thiago, and he went to Celtic. That's so random for Thiago. Next up is Alexander Arnold, and he went to Manchester United. He should learn how to defend by the GOAT himself, Harry Maguire. Next up is Fabinho, and he went to Napoli. Next up is Alisson. We were so close. Why do they always have to ruin it? Why? Anyways, next up is Van Dijk, and he went to Barcelona. Last up is Salah. For fuck's sake, releasing every Bayern Munich player to see where they would go. First up is Upamecano, and he didn't go to any club. Next up is Sabitzer, and he went to Chelsea. Next up is Musiala, and he went to Marseille. Next up is Mazraoui, and he stayed in the Bundesliga at Frankfurt. Next up is Anthony Davies, and he went to Arsenal. Next up is Leroy Sané, and he went to Barcelona. Apparently he would rather play Europa League than Champions League. Next up is Lucas Hernandez, and he went to Manchester City. Fair enough. Next up is Serge Gnabry, and he went to Leipzig. Next up is De Ligt, and he went to PSG. I'm just happy that we haven't seen Ajax or Real Sociedad yet. We might make it through a full video without seeing them. Next up is Coman, and he went to Liverpool. Next up is Muller, and he went to Real Madrid. He can finally meet Robert Lewandowski again. Next up is Goretzka, and he also went to PSG. Next up is Kimmich, and he went to Manchester United. Poor Kimmich. But we're so close to completing a full video without Ajax or Real Sociedad. Next up is Mane, and he went to AC Milan. Last up is... For fuck's sake. Releasing every Manchester City player to see where they would go. First player is Jack Grealish, and he didn't go to any club. He's too busy training his calves. Next up is Kyle Walker, and he went to Leicester City. To be fair, Leicester City does need a good goalkeeper, so he's perfect for the job. Next up is Gundogan, and he didn't go to any club. Next up is Phil Foden, and he went to Bayern Munich. And his physical stat is gonna be insane. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to use that joke anymore. Next up is Laporte. I just have one message to Ajax. Fuck you, Ajax. I'm sorry for the language, but anyways, next up is Mahrez and he went to Juventus. Fair enough. Next up is Rodri and he went to Real Sociedad. I'm going to be nice to Real Sociedad since they did beat Ajax in the other video. Next up is Joao Cancelo and he went to Spurs. I'm not gonna say a trophy joke anymore because I feel bad for the Spurs fans. No, I'm joking. He ain't gonna win any trophies at Spurs. Next up is Diaz and he didn't go to any club. Next up is Bernardo Silva and he went to PSG. Next up is Edison and he also went to PSG. Interesting. Next up is Kevin De Bruyne and he went back to his ex. And finally last up is the robot and he went to Real Madrid, releasing every PSG player to see where they would go. First up is Renato Sanchez and he went to Getafe. Next up is Carlos Soler and he didn't go to any club. Next up is Fabian and he went to Mumbai City FC. I'm actually surprised because that's the first time a player has gone to the Indian League in this series. Next up is Kimpembe and he stayed at PSG. Respect. Next up is Hakimi and he went to Atletico Madrid. Next up is Sergio Ramos and what the hell? Why the hell has he gone to Barcelona? He's probably just confused. Next up is Verratti and he went to Liverpool. Fair enough. Next up is Donnarumma and he went to Manchester City. Next up is Marquinhos. Let's just skip this one. Next up is Keylor Navas and he went to Milan. Next up Neymar Jr. and he went to Bayern Munich. Hold up, wait. I think Neymar's phone is ringing. What the hell? Anyways, next up is Mbappe and he stayed at PSG. He's probably mad that no other club would give him ownership of the club, so he just stayed at PSG. And finally last up is Messi and he went to Manchester United. iShowSpeed is going to be really confused on who to support now, releasing every player from Spurs to see where they would go. So the first player will be Lucas Moura and for fuck's sake. Anyways, next player is Davinson Sanchez and he stays loyal to Spurs. Next up is Eric Dyer and nobody wanted him. Next up is Bissouma and he went to Monaco. Next up is Kulusevski and he went to Manchester City. Is City trying to build a Viking attack? Anyways, next up is Bentancur and he went to Wolfsburg. Next up is Richarlison and he went to Real Madrid. It looks like the Madrid attack has unlocked a new celebration. A pigeon. Anyways, next up is Perisic and he also stays loyal to Spurs. Next up is Christian Romero and he went to PSG. Next up is for fuck's sake now they are also back. Next up is Loris and he went to Aston Villa. Martinez should teach him how to save a penalty. Anyways, next up is Son and he went to Newcastle. Looks like the oil money is coming in good. Next up is Harry Kane and he's a free agent, so now he has some time to fly up to the moon and take back the ball he shot up there during the World Cup, releasing every AC Milan player to see where they would go. So first player is Florenzi and he goes to PSV, the rivals of Ajax, so that's good. Next up is Rebic and he went to Wolfsburg. Next up is Calabria and he went to Strasbourg. Next up is Bennacer and he went to Liverpool, so he went from playing Serie A football to playing Championship football. Next up is Giroud and he went to Atletico Madrid, and he's so slow that by the time he's made it to Atletico Madrid Darwin Núñez would have scored a goal. Or maybe that's too unrealistic since it's physically impossible for Darwin Núñez to score. Anyways, next up is Gier and he went to Arsenal. Next up is Manchester City and they went to Zlatan. Next up is Tomori who joined Borussia Dortmund. Next up is Toenails who stayed at AC Milan. Next up is Leo and for fuck's sake, he is not smiling for the first time in his life and it's all Ajax's fault. Next up is Theo Hernandez and he went to Bayern Munich. Last up is my nan and she stays at AC Milan, releasing every player from Chelsea to see where they would go. First up is Mudryk and even after Chelsea spent 100 million on him he still found a way to join Arsenal. Anyways, next up is Enzo Fernandez and he stays at Chelsea, which makes sense. Next up is LeBron James and he joined Barcelona. And to be fair, he is good at shooting because he's American, so Barcelona is smart. Next up is Chilwell and nobody wanted him. Next up is Ziyech and at this point he in prison at Chelsea. Next up is Mason Mount and he went to PSG. Next up is Joao Felix and Manchester City got him. Next up is Kovacic and he didn't go to any club. Next up is Aubameyang and he went to Wolves. How did he do that? He's not Portuguese anyways. Next up is Reece James and he went to Dortmund. Next up is James Charles and he went to join Liverpool. Next up is Sterling and he went to join PSG. Next up is Mendy at goalkeeper and he went to join Atletico Madrid. And next up is Thiago Silva. I was hoping that they wouldn't come, but of course they always find a way to get in these videos. Next up is Koulibaly and he went to Juventus, which fair enough, they do need some saving. And last up is Kante and what the fuck is he doing at China? Releasing every Arsenal player to see where they would go. First up is Ben White and he went to Everton. Poor Ben, he's going to play in the Championship next season. Next up is Zinchenko and he went to Monaco. Next up is Tierney and he went to Leverkusen. Next up is Trossard and he went to Poland for some weird reason. Anyways, next up is Martinelli. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Next up is Xhaka and he's staying at Arsenal. Next up is Gabriel and he's joining AC Milan. Next up is Saliba and he's going to Benfica. He's going to make a great partnership with Gonzalo Ramos in the dressing room. Next up is Ramsdale and he went to Dortmund. Next up is Saka and he's still looking for an owner. Wait, I didn't mean it like that. Anyways, next up is Jorginho and he went to Spurs. At this point he's just getting passed around in London. Next up is Gabriel Jesus and for fuck's sake not another one. Next up is Martin Ødegaard and he went to Manchester City. Last up is Thomas Birthday Party and he went to Real Madrid.